Welcome to our October SASH session with Dr. Gabe Logan. Founded in 1993, SASH works to promote, facilitate, and disseminate research into the rich history and heritage of soccer in the United States. You can find us best in our two places: on the web, ussoccerhistory.org, and on social media with our Facebook and X accounts. A few announcements. Society members should have received an email for the membership directory. If you didn't, please check your spam folder. If you're interested in joining this directory, send a preferred email contact and a list of areas of expertise to directory@ussoccerhistory.org. You also should have received an email about renewing membership. I just did mine before this meeting. It takes several minutes only. Next, an important vote on Constitution and bylaw revisions will take place soon. Look for an email. We need your participation on this, and the board is happy to answer any questions about the process. You have to renew your membership in order to be eligible to vote for that referendum, as well as the upcoming election at the end of the year. And finally, some sad news. Colin Jost, great friend of the Society and so many of our founding members, passed away recently. The Society extends its sympathy to Colin's family and friends. Of course, he did so much for North American soccer history, and we stand on his soldiers. There will be a celebration of his life at the end of this month, October 20th. For more details, you can contact the executive committee. We plan on having a few SASH members say a word or two in a virtual portion of that celebration of life. I'd like to welcome our speaker today, Dr. Gabe Logan, professor of history at Northern Michigan University. He is the author of The Early Years of Chicago Soccer. Dr. Logan will bring us back to the origins of the U.S. Amateur Cup with an emphasis on the 1923 and 24 tournaments. The latter cup resulted in the partial selection of a roster for the Paris Olympics 100 years ago this summer. Gabe, thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you for the rest of you for joining us today. My talk is going to be fairly brief, 10 minutes on the history of the first Amateur Cup, and then I'm going to look at 5 personalities on the 1924 Olympic team. So that's the 2 parts of this paper. The first Amateur Cup tournament began in 1923, but it was never completed. And so the first completed Amateur Cup took place in 1924. So this is the century anniversary of the Amateur Cup. It's been going uninterrupted since then, with the exception of 2019 during COVID. So without any further ado, here we go. There we go. In late May 1922, at the 9th Annual United States Football Association meeting held in Boston at that hotel that's pictured there, the organization's treasurer, William S. Haddock, declared that it was a matter of national pride that the USFA select and finance an amateur team for the 1924 Olympics. He further chastised his colleagues that any member demonstrating laxity in the effort of not working for the betterment of the game. Haddock's remarks evidently struck a chord, as the USFA unanimously agreed to create and send an Olympic team to Paris. However, the mechanisms to select this team were as daunting as financing it. One promising proposal was a national amateur cup competition. The idea for a Simon Pure or amateur cup had a precedence in state soccer associations. A sampling of early U.S. soccer regions that held vibrant amateur cup championships included northern New Jersey, Connecticut, Detroit, Philadelphia, and Baltimore. The challenges lied in linking these disparate soccer bodies to compete in a national tournament. Another challenge was how to define an amateur. To assist with this question, the USFA turned to the Amateur Athletic Union, who they invited to the Boston meeting. The AAU offered the following definitions to help guide the discussion. And there you can see them right there. Another question was how to finance the Amateur Cup, or as one delegate put it, who is going to pay to see amateurs play in a park? It was a valid question. Plus, U.S. soccer was already in financial straits. A recent visit from Scotland's third Lanark cost several thousand more than was expected. The National Open Challenge Cup, one of the USFA's main financial draws, barely broke even, mostly on the strength of having the final in St. Louis. And most scandalous, James E. Schofield, a USFA secretary, embezzled several $1,000s from the Open Cup fund before disappearing. Schofield is an interesting sidebar. Following his disappearance, detectives doggedly located and captured him in Greensboro, North Carolina. The local paper published an account of his sordid past that included financial improprieties as a Massachusetts city councilman. He embezzled from the Salvation Army, where he worked as a charity captain, and a bigamy trial of 3 wives and several children. One U.S. soccer official called him a scoundrel of the highest order. Hence, United States soccer financial well-being and the trepidation of funding an amateur tournament were indeed part of the equation. Nonetheless, U.S. soccer agreed to finance the endeavor. James W. Riley, who you see in this slide, on behalf of Wisconsin's Football Association, chaired the Amateur Cup Rules Committee. This group authored tournament regulations, considered and selected runner-up medals and trophy design, and recommended that the champion represent the United States in the upcoming Paris Olympiad. The 6 regulations defining amateur are especially interesting. Some of these, such as rule number 1, were straightforward. Others, such as rules 2 and 3, ban paid athletes in any sport, including soccer. The final rules retain the spirit of amateur athletes and financial questions. Perhaps prematurely, the committee also proposed commencing with the tournament during the 22-23 season. To that end, in October 1922, soccer officials met in Newark, New Jersey for the Amateur Cup draw. 67 teams entered, not including an application from California that officials rejected due to travel expenses. Administrators separated the entries into East and West brackets following the Open Cup model. A sampling of some team names, such as New York's British Great War Veterans, or Thor Football Club, Overseas Football Club, Hispano Football Club, suggest the challenges of selecting an amateur team of native players. Further, the St. Louis leagues, which likely had the largest number of native-born players, criticized the rules since many of the better players in the St. Louis amateur leagues were former professionals or others who had received income for summer baseball play. Consequently, St. Louis did not enter a team in the initial Amateur Cup. Despite these challenges, the tournament got underway in December and methodically advanced to the final 8 teams. The last games ran into several draws, weather delays, and replays before finally arriving at 4 semifinalists. Philadelphia's Fleischer Yarn and Roxbury, Massachusetts represented the East, while Chicago's Swedish Americans and Pennsylvania's Jeanettes represented the West. With these final 4, the tournament went dormant and the matches did not occur. The USFA attributed the non-completed tournament to weather. A more caustic explanation came from the Philadelphia Inquirer, whose sport editors blamed the inaction on the USFA for not ruling with an iron fist. Instead, the paper claimed the national soccer body relinquished scheduling control to the local clubs, who never agreed on a date until it was too late. As a compromise, the USFA asked the 4 clubs to compete for participation medals, but these games never occurred. Undeterred at this inauspicious beginning, at the 1923 USFA meeting in Cleveland, the nation's soccer body again voted in favor of holding the Amateur Cup tournament and reaffirmed that the winning team would represent the U.S. in Paris. That November, 81 teams contributed a $5 entry fee to register for the tournament. The Pittsburgh Press, while lauding the popularity of the tournament, also chastised U.S. soccer for being unprepared for this many teams, as evident by the number of weekly and midweekly matches, such a large tournament required. As competition commenced, the looming 1924 Olympics and the financially strapped USFA engendered a sense of urgency on how to pay for the trip, which was estimated between $20,000 and $30,000. The USFA voted to appropriate the remaining $536 from the 1922 visit of England's Dick Kerr Ladies Football Club as an Olympic seed fund. Next, long-serving soccer official Thomas Cahill embarked on a national tour asking the nation's soccer bodies to pony up cash that was proportionate to the affiliated clubs. The USFA also approached the U.S. Olympic Committee, who agreed to contribute monies as long as the Amateur Cup tournament advertised itself as Olympic tryout matches, which the USFA agreed to. The plan worked as money slowly eked in to send a side to Paris. With finances seemingly secured, the Games got underway with a new sense of purpose and commitment. Throughout January and March, the teams whittled each other away until Philadelphia's Fleischer Yarn and Massachusetts Worcester Rangers remained in the East, and Philadelphia and Chicago's Swedish Americans and Cleveland Magyars remained in the West. At this point, it became increasingly clear to all, but perhaps the USFA leadership, that none of these teams had many native-born players. Conversely, the one team that was fully rostered, coached, and that was fully native rostered, coached, and prepared for the Cup and potentially the Olympics was St. Louis's Union Electric Soccer Club. Unlike the initial tournament, the St. Louis leagues went to great length to select and train a team that met the 1924 Amateur Cup and Olympic guidelines. Unsurprisingly, they stormed through their bracket. However, when they were to meet Chicago's Swedish Americans in Chicago at the quarterfinals, they balked. The St. Louisans correctly pointed out that both Cleveland and the Chicago clubs were ineligible as they only had a few naturalized players. Why, St. Louis coach Yorger asked, should the electricians pay to travel to Chicago and play a team that would not represent the U.S. anyway? The USFA rejected this argument. In turn, St. Louis withdrew from the games. Thus, the quarterfinals saw Chicago's Swedish Americans defeat Cleveland Magyars 2-1, and Massachusetts Philadelphia's Yarners convincingly knitted up the eastern slot by trouncing Worcester 8-0 in a lopsided affair. The final took place in mid-April. Fleischer's Yarn traveled to Chicago, where they defeated the Swedes 3-0 in front of 3,000 spectators at DePaul Field. There's an image from that game. Now the USFA had a championship amateur club, but with only a few native players. Meanwhile, the Olympics were scheduled to begin in 3 weeks. With dawning realization, the USFA devised a new strategy to select the Olympic team to augment Fleischer. Several state FAs sent select players to Paterson, New Jersey's Olympic Park, where they joined several other invited players in a series of mini matches against the Scott Athletic Association and an inter-squad scrimmage. The Olympic Committee hired George Burford, president of Philadelphia's Southeastern Soccer League, to run the squad. Burford selected 17 players with a strong Philadelphia flavor to join the Amateur Cup players that were eligible to play. This final team included 5 players from the champion team Fleischer, 2 others from Philadelphia Distant Athletic Club, 3 New Jersey players, 2 from Massachusetts, 1 was playing for Fleischer, and 1 each from New York, Pittsburgh, Chicago, St. Louis, and Los Angeles. You can see the breakdown of the team with that image. This untested team journeyed off to Paris, where they trained on the SS America. The 10-day trip consisted of calisthenics in the morning and ball skills in the evening. The U.S. side was a team of unknown talent, coached by an Englishman that few had played for, yet they managed a respectable 2-2 performance at the Olympics and 2 international friendlies. Specifically, the team defeated Estonia 1-0 in their first match, then lost their second to eventual champions Uruguay. Following their early exit, the team traveled to Warsaw, Poland, where they played Poland's Olympic team and won 3-2. From there, the team traveled to Dublin, where they lost 3-1 to the Irish Free State. So there's the first part of the Amateur Cup. For the second half of this presentation, I have selected 5 personalities from this team. Some are well known, some not so much, that I think deserve a little bit more of a spotlight and give us an understanding of this first Olympic team. The first player right there, Jimmy Douglas. The goalkeeper, Jimmy Douglas, received a fair amount of ink during the tournament. Douglas is, of course, a Hall of Fame member, and his performances are well documented. He grew up and learned his soccer in Kearney, New Jersey, that cradle bed that Tom has taught us about. His father kicked for the ONT team. As a keeper, Douglas minded the net for 10 American Soccer League teams from 1921 to 31. Certainly a journeyman. This was mostly due to ASL clubs providing him a better paycheck and some merging with other teams. It wasn't that he was cut. When the 24 Olympic Selection Committee selection occurred, Douglas was minding the nets for the Newark Skeeters. He refused to accept a salary so that he could remain an amateur and qualify for the 24 team. This is what initially drew my attention. This, of course, begs the question how he supported himself. While further research is needed, the census suggests he either worked in a factory or for the railroad. Douglas's performance was stellar in the first game, with the French papers terming him a circus acrobat. He stopped numerous shots, including 2 penalty kicks. Likewise, the Uruguay team congratulated him in keeping the score down. He would have an equally successful outing in Warsaw and Dublin, stopping numerous shots while keeping both matches manageable. He played every minute of the tour. Douglas would also mind the nets for the United States in the first World Cup team in 1930. That center picture is Douglas at the World Cup in 1930. But for this paper's purpose, over to the left, I think this image speaks. Here we see a 100-year-old image of Douglas right before the 1924 games. Dude has an attitude. He's buff, he's ripped, he's ready to play, and he certainly was the only man that played every minute of each match. The second person that I selected was Andy Straden, who scored the penalty kick in the Estonia game, and he tallied 2 more against Poland. A dive into his history shows a prolific scorer that hit his goal-scoring stride just prior and during the Olympic Games. He came to the United States at age 11 from Scotland. He played in soccer in Brockton, Massachusetts Grammar School. He began a pro career with Quincy Four River Football Club in the ASL, likely in his late teens. This only lasted a season. In 1920, he's kicking with Morris Dry Dock in Brooklyn, New York, while working as a corker, a person that secures the packages in the shipyard. Following this, he relocated to Philadelphia, where he signed with Fleischer. While there, he helped Fleischer win the American Cup in 1923 against the professional J&P Coates. Straden scored both goals. The following season of the Amateur Cup Championship and the Paris Games, Straden hit his stride. He banged in 20 goals and 32 appearances with Fleischer Yarn. The heading at the top of this slide is how one Philadelphia paper articulated his play. After the Olympics, he signed with the Shawsheen Indians, but they folded in 1925. The New York Giants picked up his contract for the rest of the 25-26 season, but his goal-scoring output diminished. In 26-27, he returned to Philadelphia to play for Wolfenden Shore. In 1930, he played with the Lighthouse Club. The papers noted his mentorship to the younger players. The third personality is the coach, or the physical director. George Burford, he caught my attention. Some articles list George Collin, the soccer editor for Boston Globe, as the manager, and at other times the coach. So, who was Burford? I found this passport interesting. If you look on the left-hand side, he identifies himself as the coach of the American team. He was an Englishman born in 1875. He migrated to the U.S. in 1893 at 25 years of age and lived in Brockton, Massachusetts, where he worked as a shoemaker. He was involved with the game in the Boston area and rose to head the Boston District League. He also worked with the local YMCA. In 1918-1919, his life gets quite interesting for U.S. soccer. He ends up going to France and was part of the American Expeditionary Forces Military Olympics and was affiliated with the United States side, likely due to his YMCA connections. Here he helped coach the U.S. military team in the Military Olympics. Following the war, he migrated to Poland, where the Polish Football Association appointed him coach of Poland's national team for the 1920 Olympics. However, Russian Bolsheviks and Poland were at war, and Poland withdrew their team. Burford stuck around in Poland, in Warsaw, and in 1921 was the head coach of Polonia Warsaw, Poland's oldest team. He coached the team to the championship match where they finished runner-up. Passport records indicate he returned to Brockton in February 1922. In 23, he moved to Philadelphia, where he was the physical director of the Pennsylvania Railroad YMCA. He also hosted a regular nightly feature on Philadelphia radio station WOO that gave a soccer report from 8:30 to 8:45. In addition to training and coaching the 1924 team, I suggest his Polish connections are the reason why the United States played friendly there. Burford would also be the trainer for the 1930 U.S. World Cup team. He passed away in 1931. Eddie Hart from St. Louis is my fourth study. Hart was the team's youngest player at 20 years old when selected. He grew up playing primarily for St. Matthew's Sodality and St. Louis's Municipal League. St. Louis officials selecting him to go to New Jersey for the tryouts. He had to pay for his own way to get to Patterson. He played all three of the 30-minute exhibition games. He told the St. Louis press that he played out of his head and that Burford asked him to continue in each session. He worked for the Curly clothing manufacturer in St. Louis, whose fellow workers chipped in $80 for walking around money while he was in Paris. He saw his first action against Poland, where he scored the winning goal, kind of justified his place on the team. After the Olympics, he returned to St. Louis, where he signed with Skull and Steel. The following year, he tried his luck on the East Coast, signing with the Providence Clamdiggers, but this proved unsuccessful. He returned to St. Louis and continued playing in the professional leagues. He was a member of the 1930 Sticks Bar and Puller team that finished runner-up in the Open Cup, and he finished his career in St. Louis, still playing in the 1940s. My final study, and the most intriguing to me, is the bespectacled Dr. Aggie Bricks from, of all places, Lexington, Nebraska, which I've located there on the map. This is no booming metropolis. This is cornfield country. How this guy ended up on the Olympic team is quite the remarkable story. He was a physician. He was the team's oldest player and was California's contribution to the team. Bricks was born in Lexington, Nebraska in 1895 to Danish parents. The Lexington History Society discovered his family returned to Denmark when he was 5. I suggest it was there that he learned his soccer, unless there was this hotbed in Lexington, Nebraska we don't know about. In 1910, he returned from Copenhagen at the age of 15 back to Lexington, Nebraska, where he graduated from Lexington High School the following year. He entered and completed both pharmacy and medical school, getting doctors in each, at the University of Nebraska by the time he was 21. He shows up again in 1920 playing a piano concerto for the 9th Annual Nurses Convention while a doctor at Evangelical Bismarck Hospital in North Dakota. Again, no soccer hotbed there. Prior to the Olympics, he was a musical composer, copywriting several songs and concertos. He invented and patented less intrusive medical equipment. He discovered certain tumor triggers. He also had an interest in early aviation and was instrumental in patenting inventions for the McCabe biplane, which you see there also on that slide. Prior to the Olympics, Bricks took a job in Hollywood, California, where he joined the Los Angeles Athletic Club, which you see in the center picture. While he was with the LAAC, he was the top scoring striker for the Mercuries, as they called themselves. In 1924, the LAAC won Southern California and played San Francisco Olympia in the best of three, where Bricks figures prominently in the press, despite San Francisco taking the championship. Following the California Champion Series in April 24, he received word of his selection to the tryouts, traveled to the East Coast, where he made the Olympic team in New Jersey. Reports indicated he was well liked by his teammates. He hit the woodwork in a near miss against Estonia as a starter. Later in the game, he was severely injured in the kidneys, and this sidelined him for the rest of the tournament. Burford commented specifically on his skill when he told the press the U.S. would have likely given the Uruguay team a better game if Bricks was able to play. Uruguay didn't think that was the case, but nonetheless, it speaks to Bricks' talent. He returned to LA in the medical profession until his passing in 1963. In sum, a century later, both of these tournaments continue. The Amateur Cup recently crowned New York's Pancyprian Soccer Club after they defeated Milwaukee Torrent 6-0 this past summer in DeKalb, Illinois. The men's Olympic team continues to compete in Olympics, still seeking the elusive championship. Here they are before the knockout match, before they lost to Morocco 4-0. Conversely, the 2024 Women's Amateur Cup Championship belongs to Utah's Pan World Elite Women Football Club, who defeated the Wingers Football Club 3-0, also in DeKalb. And while the women's Olympic side continues their golden shot. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabe. That was excellent. We have a few folks here. I'll open it up to questions. I have one kind of technical question, but I'll defer to anybody else who would like to ask a question.
I would. Well,
Michael Lewis from New York with the question.
Actually, it's not a question as much as Gabe, thank you very much for the presentation. I wrote a story about the 1924 Olympic team, and you filled so many gaps and holes that I didn't know about, and I had an enjoyable time listening to you. Thank you. I wish I had a more salient question or statement to make, but thank you. I appreciate it.
Gabe, I'm going to ask, this is Tom McCabe from London, going to ask the kind of generalist question. If there's someone out there looking to do a profile of a team or a tournament, something similar to what you've done here, where can you direct them in terms of sources or process? I mean, how did you piece this together?
Yeah, in the past 4 or 5 years, newspapers have become online, and that's helped dramatically. especially the soccer reporting out of Philadelphia and Boston and St. Louis. So we all know of those sources. The census have also proved quite valuable. But what informed a lot of this for me were passport and immigration records, especially for Burford and for Bricks. Burford, his census records are a little dodgy. As near as I can tell, he left his wife in Massachusetts and ended up in Philadelphia. And he sometimes was in the census and sometimes he wasn't. But the passports, and that was where I was able to kind of track him down and see where he was and what happened. I'm not sure that Poland realizes the extent of his influence with colonial Warsaw. Even that's just a bit of a passing. So to answer your question, this is scratching the surface. But I found the passport records and the World War I military draft registration cards quite helpful for this research.
Same with my experience. When you're trying to fill these gaps of who their parents were, when they immigrated, from where, what's their job, something like a passport application or census material really can give you something. And another thing for folks out there, watching, listening, city directories are really important. You can look up, the person, where they're living, get a sense of their neighborhood, what they're doing, for work. Maybe are there other familiar, relations right there. So you can start to piece together the family tree. And if you're lucky, like Gabe, you're gonna, potentially poke around the family tree and find a secret or two. In this case, maybe something on the personal end, or something, like going to Poland post-war and coaching. So I mean, a great example of doing the dirty work with the primary sources. So kudos to you for that. I have a question, because I was rereading some notes in the same time period today for something I'm working on. And I have here, in the fall of 1923, the resolution was passed that the winner of the National Challenge Cup would travel to Paris to compete in the Olympic Games. So that's what the note says. Now, I might have taken the wrong note or assumed that it was the National Challenge Cup, but this clearly is not the National Challenge Cup, because they're professional teams, right? They need amateurs or professed amateurs to compete. So do you think that's the technicality there? And the follow-up, were these guys really amateurs? Because I'm not convinced that Jimmy Douglas, the first player you profiled, didn't take money to play soccer. He's switching teams every year. He's probably doing it for the money to augment what's going on, in his work life, the industrial work life, working in the factory. So any comments on that would be appreciated.
Yeah, those are good questions, and I don't think we can know the answers to those. Douglas and Straden were obviously receiving money for their educated feet and hands. How much the Olympic Committee chose to follow that, unknown. Were they amateurs? They weren't playing in the players that were selected were not in the professional leagues. I can say that. So, with the exception of Douglas, who went out of his way to say, "I'm not a professional." So that's all I can speak to that. I wish I did have more answers on that.
Because that would certainly complicate it, because other nations have professional or proto-professional. So it's a complicated thing. It's like showing up to an age group tournament and you have, overage players, or, if you're playing men's soccer like me, underage players, right? You're like, that person's not 55. So yes, I mean, all these are all great little tidbits. Where is the project going from here? What you have planned to profile, more of the traveling party?
I
To
could
do
have
more with it?
easily looked at the other 12 members of the team. It's interesting. Most teams had 22 players. Burford stuck with 17, including not even having a backup goalkeeper. And I think all 17 of them were equally fascinating. Bricks is what really stands out to me. If the United States Football Association was looking for a pure amateur, he personifies it. He's that Renaissance man. He's a musician. He's a physicist. He's a medical doctor. He's a pharmacist, and he's a striker of caliber play. I can't figure out where he was playing. I get it. I think he learned his soccer in Copenhagen, but he comes back at only 15 years of age. He's going to medical school. Maybe he's probably playing in the Omaha, North Dakota leagues. I don't know how vibrant they are. But then he's able to go out to LA and become one of the leading scorers of the city. That's kind of where my research is going. I want to know more about this guy. His obituary misses a lot of it.
I wonder, as an elite who would have had correspondence, who may have, saved his papers. I wonder if they're in, the family's hands, or, a local library or a historical society. That would be really interesting to kind of flesh out this really complex character that you're poking around. That would be wonderful.
The LA Athletic Club recently sold, and their records are in storage, if not destroyed. Which is, they didn't know that they had a soccer team.
It's often the case. Any questions for others here? I'm looking at the chat right now as I do that. If anybody else wants to chime in with a comment or a question, please go.
Yeah, I had a question. Really great, Gabe. Thanks so much. Were you able to retrieve reports about the friendlies that were around the Olympic Games?
The Dublin game, interestingly enough, has it's on the SASH website, has a 5-minute video of the Dublin friendly, and that's quite telling in its own way. I started to bring that to the show, but decided against it. The Warsaw papers I want to look at a little bit closer, but I haven't been able to access them yet, and plus I don't read Polish, so that's going to require a little bit more digging. But I think there's going to be another side of the story if I can access the Warsaw papers and the Dublin papers as well.
Okay, I might be able to help you with those papers, because I've been in touch with the newspaper archives, and talking about the 28 Olympics. So they're often the same.
Yeah.
In the chat,
I think in 28 the United States ended up going to Poland again.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Thanks, Jim. That would be quite appreciated. Tom,
Okay.
what were you going to say, sir?
In the chat discussion, Arrow has put in some information where there is evidence of an Omaha City Association where teams in Nebraska are competing with Kansas. So again, early evidence of soccer in Middle America and the college level as well. Trying to establish it as a popular sport on campus, but not so much according to the sources found there. I have one more comment where I'm listening to you, and the specter of Tom Cahill, I think, is floating around this. born in New York, grew up in St. Louis, and he is out east in New Jersey and New York during this time. He's called the father of American soccer for his influence in the formation of the United States Soccer Football Association in 1913. So right around this time, he's right in the middle of it, right? So the way I understand it, and I think James would agree, he wants to bring this team to the Olympic Games, right? He's raising money, he's traveling, looking to, rah, let's support the team and send them to Paris because he wants to go, right? Remember, he was, the tour manager of the 1916 trip to Scandinavia. And then he gets embroiled in soccer politics, which often seems the case with Cahill. Yeah. He and Peter Peel have disagreements. Peel accuses him of stabbing him with a penknife. And in the weeks before this tournament, Tom Cahill is deposed as the secretary of U.S. soccer, if you will, and doesn't get the chance to take the team to Paris. That was mentioned a little bit. What do you think about that in the mix, or you just wanted to steer clear of this, soccer politics and controversy to focus on the team and some of its members?
That is part of the story. The USFA was against the ropes financially, and Cahill almost single-handedly was able. He was evangelical in going out to these various soccer clubs and cajoling them or demanding or strong-arming each of them to get money. And I also think that's why BRICS was part of the tournament, because California kicked in quite a bit of money. And yes, he did speak to that. He said that Collins, the Boston editor that ended up being the manager of the trip, he went because he had more of a Scottish accent. And you're right, he and Peel did have that argument in St. Louis, and there allegedly was a knife pulled against Peter Peel. As you know, Cahill said he was just simply cutting off a plug of tobacco. Yeah, Peel and McKay, they didn't like each other. But I think Cahill was responsible for getting the finances for this team, and he probably should have been able to go on that trip. But Peel did go, and Collins went, and he did. So, yeah, his shadow is long over this.
Yeah, he was voted out of office by one vote in the weeks before the trip. So I think he really, lamented that fact. In the run up to that, though, he's talking about, these are the tribal 20s, right? Anti-immigration, in between the wars. And Cahill is very much what they would have called at that time 100% American, or believing in 100% Americanism. And this is one of the things he's been talking about for about a decade, right? We have to make U.S. soccer more American, more, well, air quotes here, Native American, right? People born and raised. And this, first amateur cup or two leading to a selection of Native players is a really interesting moment in American soccer history. And you've done a wonderful job with it, Gabe. I think folks have asked all the questions that they want to ask. We're on the top of the hour, so we want to thank you for spending some time with us today. Please watch, listen, and we will see you next time on a Friday SASH session. Thanks to everyone. We can hit stop.